A quick one today. So, while I was going through chapter 8, I was a bit bothered by the fact that some of the core points and progression of the story may come off as kind of muddy or confusing unless you had played through the 2.0 and 2.1 events, both of which are currently not available and likely won't be in the recollections for another few months at least, right? And for people who are relatively new, or only play the main stories, or who just couldn't play through those events for whatever reason, you're basically left with just a handful of options, right? You either go in blind and confused, or you look up a playthrough on YouTube and watch that entire thing, or you can watch this thing where I will try to shore up the missing bits as best I can. Before we get started, I'd really like to just emphasize that this isn't meant to be a comprehensive or holistic summary of these events. It's really just the important bits that you'd be better served knowing prior to starting chapter 8, right? Just the important stuff. And there really are only two primary important points that either get, very little or no mention at all outside of the San Francisco and Texas chapters, but they are fairly critical for context going into chapter 8. And those are the existence of Anjala, or as she used to be known, Miss Kimberly, and the whereabouts of Erd and how we even ended up in Brazil in the first place. Because, realistically, for someone who hasn't played through either event, Anjala would be a complete stranger, and we also would have then jumped straight from the storm at the end of Vienna in chapter 7 to an execution in the middle of Brazil at the start of chapter 8, right? It's a bit of tonal whiplash there. Now, starting with Anjala, right? Up to this point, she has been a purely event-based character. She hadn't appeared in any main story content, and the first time we actually even meet her is towards the end of the 2.0 event, San Francisco. Despite this, upon first encountering her in Chapter 8, Verton treats her with recognition and some sense of familiarity, as if we were supposed to have already met her sometime before, which, of course, we have. However, for anyone who hasn't read the event chapters, it may come off as a little bit odd. So, what exactly is the deal here? Well, by the time we reach the end of the 2.0 event, we have come across Eternity, who we now know is sort of this neutral arms dealer for all sides, and really just for anyone who has the sharps to afford her wares. And it's to this end that Matthias, a newly introduced member of Manist, has purchased a means to escape his current predicament from her. That predicament being that Matilda and her merry band of misfits are coming to beat him down for, being Manus. And for this, Eternity hands him a little toy robot, telling him to wind it up when he is in need, and then she promptly dips. And it's revealed in a trace that this toy robot had initially been held in Foundation keeping for a while, before a disgruntled employee decided to pawn it off on Eternity for a bit of cash. Matthias, who doesn't really want to stick around either, passes the toy off to a Manus Mook, and then also leaves. And upon winding the toy, Anjala, at this point known as Miss Kimberly, appears, and we learn that she is a demon, and that the robot is her contract object. Whoever possesses it is able to control her actions. Unfortunately, the Manus member that is currently possessing it is just entirely checked out, and nearly nonverbal, and is basically unable to provide any real orders beyond just, kill, which she attempts to do, squaring off against Matilda, Jay, and some other guys. And if you have heard people complain that Anjo's characterization is inconsistent, this is where a lot of that is going to stem from, right? You see, while Brazil, Anjo is kind of painted as this sympathetic figure, this lost girl who's alone and seeking freedom and a place to belong, San Francisco Anjo is not that. Right, San Francisco Anjo, Miss Kimberly, is kind of bloodthirsty, right? She seems really, really eager to just mess stuff up. And, in fact, she does exactly that, right? She kills Holic, one of Jay's friends, and then skewers Jay on his own sword. So, if you're wondering why people are confused or upset about her character in Brazil, it's probably because of this. In any case, she essentially beats Matilda's getting down, and just as she's about to land the finishing blow, she is forced to flee due to the late arrival of Razor Squad. And as far as 2.0 significance goes in relation to Chapter 8, that's about it. Which then leads us to 2.1, Texas, right? Where we do meet with Anjo again, and also where we have the primary tie-in as to why we even wind up in Brazil in the first place. You see, Verton, for a while now, has been seeking a woman known as Erd, and knowing that Erd has some connections to A2 magazine, takes Lilia and moseys on down to Texas, where an editor by the name of Barbara is known to be currently operating. Naturally, stuff happens and we don't get to meet Barbara right away, right? Instead, we have to go through the whole Haunted Motel ordeal before we finally get our answers, and it's in doing this that Burton meets Anjo in person for the first time. Interestingly enough, the personality of the Anjo that we meet here is already closer to that of her in Brazil than it is to her in San Francisco, which really just kind of leads you to wonder what exactly was going on with the characterization. I think a case can be made that this is either a result of Tuesday's Motel exposing her deepest fears, or due to her ravenous hunger after being sealed for so long in San Francisco, causing her to sort of act out of character. Either way, I personally find it to be a bit of a weak justification, and if anything, it's just kind of poorly represented with the materials that we've been, given. In any case, Verton and Argus interrogate Anjo, who we find out is just a terrible actress and really, really bad at lying, right? So bad that before she manages to escape again, Verton is able to find out that she is Manus, she's a demon, and she's apparently looking for something, which is going to become pertinent in Chapter 8. After that, we beat up Tuesday's Devil Baby, and the whole motel ordeal comes to a close, and we're finally able to get our answers out of Barbara, who tells us that Erd is probably in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is then directly leading up to Chapter 8. Now, some side notes that may be somewhat pertinent but aren't as important, at least not now. 2.1 introduces us to Stefan, a Xeno defector who was briefly mentioned in Chapter 8. He winds up pulling a Kumar midway through the story. We are also given hints in 2.1 that Xeno's morale as a whole may not be in stellar condition, as the Texas base is found to be entirely abandoned save for one remaining soldier who asks Lilia to beat him up in exchange for helping her get her magic jet back. We are also introduced to Miss Grace in both of these event chapters. She hasn't really played a huge role yet, but she is likely going to be a significant character moving forward, as she is noted to be upper echelon Manus. And that's about it. I'm a bit ambivalent on having event stories tie in so closely to the main story. On one hand, I think that it's really neat that we get more progression and more, immediately applicable world building in events and side stories. But on the other hand, I think it's just a bit of a disservice to have central plot points hinge on, knowledge of story that maybe isn't going to be immediately accessible to people who may have fallen behind or are relatively new or just didn't have a chance to play any particular event, right? It's not a deal breaker by any means. It can be patched up within the main story itself, but I do think it weakens the structural integrity of the narrative in those cases. Regardless, the pattern going forward does seem to be that events are going to tie in more closely to main stories, so we may wind up with more of these situations in the future, so I'll probably wind up making more of these videos when that happens. In any case, that's the video. Definitely a shorter one, not generally what I usually do, but it was just kind of bugging me, so I decided to put something out. Anyway, thank you to Ayn Rand Paul Ryan, Mikoyan, and Day for supporting me on Patreon. It is always appreciated. And for everybody else, thank you for stopping in. I hope it was useful, and as always, I will see you on the next one, alright? Bye-bye.